Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 9th of December 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And we're delighted to say we will be joined by live video Skype link by Vanessa Beeley, who will be speaking to us from Damascus. And we've also got David Scott from Northern Exposure, reporting from north of the border. Well, a couple of words on the weather. It's pretty overcast most places, Norfolk, Plymouth and Cardiff. It's a bit dark skied apparently north of the border, east central Scotland and Glasgow. But we're told it's a bit smoggy in Brighton, so not so bright in Brighton.
Okay, well, let's get straight on then and go to Syria. And of course, the Russians have declared, they've suspended combat operations, and Sergey Lavrov saying it's yet another operation to evacuate civilians willing to leave the place, and the biggest one so far is underway there. And of course, he's speaking about Aleppo. So I'm going to welcome Vanessa to the program. Thanks for joining us, Vanessa. What's the situation over there at the moment?
Well, the events are sort of escalating, particularly in Aleppo. When I arrived on Monday, there was definitely a simmering excitement, let's say, among the people of Damascus, even then. And when the news started to come in on Monday night of virtually the whole liberation of Aleppo, initially the Syrian TV channels were actually saying all of Aleppo was liberated, and then it was being qualified by Syrian Arab Army spokespeople that the old city had been liberated. Now, this liberation came with some negotiations between Russia and Turkey, is what I understand. I'm not too sure of the details of those negotiations, but basically, as the Syrian Arab Army was advancing into the old city, which, by the way, was expected to be the hardest and the hottest battle, let's say, because it was where they were most tightly embedded. And also the sort of the area where it was most heavily mined, where there were the highest number of snipers and so on. So this was expected to be the hardest battle. Thanks to the Russian-Turkish negotiations, the majority of those various NATO and Gulf state-funded militants and terrorists, led by Nusra Front, of course, laid down their arms. They surrendered. And so I would definitely see this latest ceasefire, in inverted commas, something that is very much under control of the Syrian and the Russian government, in order to allow the final evacuations of those civilians that have been incarcerated by the various militant and terrorist factions in East Aleppo, for sure. We've seen, one thing we have seen is that the numbers, of course, have been hugely exaggerated by the UN and, of course, by the Western media and Western governments. The numbers that we're seeing of civilians that are actually coming out of East Aleppo are much, much lower than have been broadcasted and amplified by our media, corporate media.
And have any of the stories from Eastern Aleppo started hitting the news over there yet? Are we getting any witness testimony from civilians in East Aleppo?
Yeah, I mean, and not only witness testimony, Mike, what we're seeing, I mean, the footage that is coming out on Syrian TV is quite extraordinary. I mean, we've seen a full 360-degree filming footage of inside, for example, the eye hospital, which was one of the original Syrian government hospitals inside East Aleppo that was requisitioned by the terrorist groups and turned into basically what looks like an arms store, a sniping tower, everything that we described it to be, but which Western media in their news fakery, of course, has been continuing to portray as a functioning hospital. But the actual film footage is showing the Hell Cannon missile stores, also the medicine stores. I mean, this is extraordinary. More footage is coming out now of how basically the militant factions and the terrorist factions had been stockpiling medicines, food, water supplies, weapons, I mean, everything. And so, again, this completely dismantles 4 years of Western propaganda from the NGOs, from the think tanks, from the media, from the governments. It's quite extraordinary. And then, of course, even we saw the BBC even having to, because they've actually been in Aleppo, believe it or not, since Monday, I believe. They'd gone in the day I arrived, and I went to the Ministry of Information. They told me that the BBC was already there, which is extraordinary. We saw a total of 22 seconds devoted to the liberation of Aleppo on a 1 p.m. news program from the BBC. So they were obviously flailing around, deciding how on earth they could do damage limitation on the lies they've been telling for 4.5 years. And Lies Doucet products, however you pronounce her name, produced a report basically on civilians leaving East Aleppo and praising President Assad, praising the Syrian Arab Army for their liberation and being allowed to finally return home to their house that had been occupied by the terrorist factions.
So how many are left there at the moment? I mean, how much of East Aleppo is still to be liberated?
A very, very, very small percentage. I mean, the official figure is around 80%. We're getting reports from on the ground that really it's only very, very sort of hardline factions or pockets that have been left. Of course, it appears that Channel 4 also put out an appeal for their camera woman, Waad al-Khatib, who of course has been producing many of the slightly spurious propaganda videos from inside East Aleppo. And they put out, Jon Snow himself put out an appeal for help for her to be got out of East Aleppo. And this was quite amusing when Jon Snow had been guilty of blatantly aggressively attacking Faris Shahabi, who's one of the most influential members of parliament inside Aleppo, who promptly, offered to help. What it now transpires, and of course it's now gone very quiet, is that it appears that Waad al-Khatib is not actually too keen on leaving East Aleppo, which raises the questions why.
Yeah, well, indeed. Well, look, let's look at the reaction from the White House. And this is Patrick Henningsen's article on 21st Century War. New Obama executive action opens doors to unlimited arms for Islamist terrorists in Syria. And he says on Tuesday, Barack Obama issued a White House memorandum, and we'll show that in a second, which waives any arms export control restrictions on providing military assistance to any and all foreign forces in Syria. And this is according to a White House press release. And Patrick's saying presumably this includes not only guns and ammunition, but also lethal tow missiles and RPGs for tens of thousands of extremist foreign fighters and Salafi terrorists currently operating inside Syria, as well as thousands of US trained and equipped fighters waiting in camp for both Turkey and Jordan. So let's have a look at the text here. It's a little bit small, but that is available on that article if you want to read it in better detail. It is a memorandum for the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense, basically lifting these arms controls, export controls. This is a sheer act of desperation by the White House, isn't it, Vanessa?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's we're seeing it across the board. Actually, we saw an article from Michael Weiss, who's a known Zionist supporter, on the Daily Beast, basically talking very much along these lines and pushing very hard for what we're seeing now is a hard push for partitioning. We've seen the EU basically offering financial incentives to President Assad to allow, let's say, the what they term as the moderate rebel factions autonomy in Syria. So in other words, to create statehoods within Syria. We saw this in a last-ditch attempt by Stefan de Mistura to give autonomy to East Aleppo, which of course was dismissed out of hand by both Russia and Syria, as will be any plans to partition Syria. And we're seeing a united front here from the United States and the EU. The Council on Foreign Relations put out an article also suggesting that maybe it was time, or some members were suggesting it was time to put pressure on Turkey and Saudi Arabia to provide manpads, so ground-to-air missiles. Although they did actually state quite clearly that they already have them. So I think what we're actually seeing is a desperate scrambling by the axis of intervention to again for damage limitation. You know, Aleppo symbolically is a huge victory for Syria. And it will be reflected throughout the rest of Syria. I mean, now what this does is it enables the Syrian Arab Army to move towards Idlib and towards Raqqa to liberate those areas. We're already definitely seeing a reaction from the terrorist factions on the ground. They've started to attack Palmyra again to try and, I think, to distract the Syrian Arab Army back to that front. But Russia has been bombing them and pushing them back towards Deir ez-Zor, which is another sort of major front for the Syrian Arab Army. So we're going to be seeing these attempts to take back control of the narrative, but also of the actual campaign in Syria. I think to a huge extent it's doomed to failure because Aleppo it's such a massive victory. And it's one that is going to enable the Syrian Arab Army to move forwards and to take back the other fronts that are obviously targets for the United States and for the EU.
Vanessa, if I may, just a quick question from me. What is actually happening with respect to the terrorists? So they've laid down weapons. Well, some of them have in Aleppo at least. Where are they going? Are they staying put? Are they disbanding where they are? Or are they moving out of the area? And if so, are they being monitored?
Again, this is an extraordinary aspect of this entire war that is being waged against Syria that is hardly ever discussed for very obvious reasons in Western media. The Syrian government, amnesty program and Ministry of Reconciliation work tirelessly to provide reconciliation and amnesty, even for, as they describe them, people who have murdered their own people. So if these fighters are Syrian, for example, they basically, provided they hand in their weapons, they are given full amnesty. Many of the extremist factions will be, if they're Syrian, will be bussed, as far as I know, to Idlib for the time being. Others, let's say, my understanding, again, I've been speaking to various people here, is those who might have originally been part of the so-called moderate Free Syrian Army who were then co-opted either or coerced into joining the more extremist factions will be given help to reintegrate and to re-establish within the community that they came from inside Syria. Now, this causes some controversy inside Syria itself among the people. So this is a very brave move by the Syrian government to try and heal Syria for the future. And again, it is something that is completely negated by Western media and Western governments. It's ignored. So if they are foreign militants, however, which we suspect that the majority in East Aleppo are foreign militants, there is a strong chance that they will be imprisoned. And then I'm kind of, this is slightly speculation. I don't have confirmation from the Minister of Justice, who I'm hoping to see shortly. And then negotiations will be had between their home country and the Syrian government as regards extradition. So it will be handled in a very sort of professional, legal way. Is certainly the impression that I am getting.
Okay.
Well, just before we move on to what else Sergey Lavrov had to say, there was just one other thing that struck me. If people are being moved to Idlib or to Deir ez-Zor, they're being pushed to Deir ez-Zor with more fighting. Does that mean that Deir ez-Zor, for example, is going to be the next Aleppo? And if that's the case, the mainstream media are going to have a problem because if they're proven to be propagandists in Aleppo, they're not going to be able to pull the same gag in Deir ez-Zor.
Deir ez-Zor, there's one very good reason, Mike, why Deir ez-Zor has never been covered, actually. It's because I think this is a siege that has been going on for 2.5 years, and it's a siege 100% by ISIS, of civilians and of Syrian Arab Army soldiers inside Deir ez-Zor, surrounded by ISIS. And so this is one reason why the media has actually ignored this particular siege, because it's a very clear case of, let's say, US-backed, armed and funded mercenaries under the banner of ISIS, brutally besieging and picking off, killing, murdering civilians and Syrian Arab army. The number of massacres in Deir ez-Zor are too many to count, from both suicide bombs and by incursions by the ISIS militants. And of course, we had the recent bombing of the Syrian Arab army soldiers near Deir ez-Zor, which allowed the ISIS militants to take more ground, which has now been taken back. So Deir ez-Zor, yes, it will be a front, but I don't think we're going to see the same level of media interest in it, because it's going to be even harder for them to swing that one. I think you're more likely to see a focus on, for example, al-Bab, which is a town to the north of Aleppo, which is one of the areas that Turkey is encroaching upon. Basically, an area from Raqqa to al-Bab to Manbij, which is to the north and to the east of Aleppo. That, in my opinion, that will be the next front, and that is where you may see the media try and pick up with their sort of siege and starvation narrative again. But it's going to be very difficult for them to retain any degree of credibility after the extent to which their lies have been exposed for the last 4.5 years on Aleppo. I mean, the black box of Aleppo has been found.
Yes, indeed. And this comment from Lavrov yesterday, I mean, it's pretty spectacular. He was saying, as for Jabhat al-Nusra, the United States is seeking to spare it. Naturally, we cannot accept that. Al-Nusra is a terrorist organization recognized as such by the United Nations, the United States, Russia, and other countries. It sets one thinking. I can't imagine anybody saying anything stronger in diplomatic terms. What he is saying here is, you guys are supporting terrorists, and we know you are. So, and we're saying it publicly now. So, the mainstream media may be in a bit of difficulty, credibility-wise, but this really puts the Obama administration under the cosh, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I mean, we saw this before, Mike, as I mentioned, with the bombing of the Syrian Arab army soldiers in Deir ez-Zor, which was a deliberate massacre of a national army by the United States coalition, including Britain and Denmark and Australia. And we saw it then that Russia took the very clear position that the United States was aiding and abetting ISIS in this instance. So here we now have them saying, well, actually, you're not only aiding and abetting ISIS, you are doing the same thing with Nusra, which is al-Qaeda. Now, this is something that has been made clear, whether it's through WikiLeaks, whether it's through, through various and extensive documentation, including the Department of Intelligence Agency own redacted documents. So it's not news, but you're right, to see this stated quite so clearly on a diplomatic political platform is quite extraordinary. But I think it's also indicative of the extent to which the Russian patience has run out. It's not even running out, it's run out. And I think what we are seeing, and I think again what the liberation of Aleppo is particularly symbolic of, is a seismic shift in the paradigm, both geopolitically and just strategically, generally. I think we're seeing a massive shift away from a unipolar globalism focused very much on the United States, to now Russia being seen and perceived as a giant in diplomatic circles, and a giant that is not working from a basis of supremacism and racism and hegemony, but a giant that is very clearly working with a sovereign nation in order to resolve its issues and in order to cleanse it of what is fundamentally a terrorist invasion of a sovereign nation and the negation of the self-determination of the people of that country. And so you're seeing, in my view, you're seeing a massive shift. We're now also, by the way, seeing China, actually the Chinese envoy was here yesterday in Damascus giving a conference. And we're actually seeing China doing what it does best, investing in rebuilding in a very mutually beneficial way. This is not the US that will just come and destroy a country and then plunder its resources and leave it in a failed state, as it has done with Libya and Iraq. We're seeing countries who, yes, they may have their own self-interest in intervening in Syria at the behest of the elected Syrian government, so legally. But we're seeing genuine attempts to rebuild Syria and to invest in Syria in a positive and mutually beneficial way. This is extraordinary. You know, this is going to change the face of our future completely, is my opinion. And one very quick thing I want to say, which I only found out yesterday, is that Russia, at its own cost, is taking children from Syria with their parents, so they're paying for the parents and the child to go to Russia for treatment of either injuries from the war that's been waged against Syria, or even with chronic illnesses. Now, this is something that has not been mentioned anywhere in Western media. Even many of the Syrians I spoke to were not aware of it. This is a huge humanitarian effort being carried out by Russia that has gone completely beneath the radar of our media.
Okay, well, look, I want to bring David Scott in at this point because, David, you wanted to bring up Boris Johnson's faux pas, if that's what it was. And hopefully, Vanessa, if you can just stick with us for a minute or two and we'll get your comments on this as well. But of course, Boris Johnson claiming that in a speech or in a discussion at a conference that Saudi Arabia running proxy wars in the Middle East. Theresa May doesn't seem too happy about it.
It was a remarkable intervention from Boris. I'm still not quite sure what to make of it. I'll just read it out. It's not very long. He said, there are politicians who are twisting and abusing religion in different strains of the same religion in order to further their own political objectives. And that's one of the biggest political problems in the whole region. And the tragedy for me, and that's why you have these proxy wars being fought the whole time in the area, is that there is not enough strong leadership in the countries themselves. So this is Boris calling for an end to subdivision and a return to strong national leadership. So this is Boris supporting Assad. No, but what is Boris doing? He's actually telling the truth. Is someone not explained to him what's expected of him?
Well, the answer to that is no, David, because of course now there are so many lies these people have been told. They're caught out. They don't even know what their own policy is, but they've all got huge egos, so they're going to say the first thing that comes into their head. Certainly, Mr. Johnson.
But surely the basis of running a whole series of proxy wars to destabilize a nation is you don't go public and criticize the proxy wars to destabilize nations. It's like, if you're running a Ponzi scheme, you don't tell everyone it's a Ponzi scheme. It's kind of basic. Am I missing something here?
Well, I think the only thing we could say is you are making the assumption that Boris Johnson does actually know what is going on. If you were in charge of an operation, would you tell Boris Johnson what you were really doing? Because he's such a buffoon, he could blow any part of it. So I'm going to say I rather think that, of course, he doesn't know what the full agenda is. He might know part of it, but he's a blundering idiot, I think I'm allowed to say, a loose cannon. So he's capable of coming out with all sorts of outrageous comments because the man, of course, is deluded.
Vanessa, what are your thoughts?
Well, I watched, I struggle to watch Boris at the best of times, but I watched him sort of labor his way through this statement. And I mean, one of the most hilarious things that I think he comes out with is that, I can't do a Boris impersonation, but he basically he basically says, there are no leaders with vision. Well, I mean, this is the most myopic statement and certainly one that we should expect from the likes of Boris when you have leaders like, let's say, Assad, who does have tremendous vision for his country, and also a huge number of opposition members inside Syria who have vast vision for their country, way beyond any sort of restrictions of Western democracy vision, which we know to be flawed beyond belief anyway. So, yeah, I mean, I think this is just Boris not without a clue of what he should really be saying, very much as he was when he was promoting the white helmets blindly. I would ask him, are the white helmets, one, are they still in East Aleppo? Two, are they going to be demining the mines that they planted that are blowing up civilians that are trying to to escape from East Aleppo? That would be my first question to him. So, you know, I think we have Boris here, yes, to a degree, letting the cat out of the bag and demonstrating his own ignorance, perhaps, of the what is going on behind his back, let's say. I would say there's still an element of promoting sectarian divisions. I mean, he's making the clear statement that these countries are flailing around in a sectarian mire because they don't have strong national leadership. Well, no, Mr. Johnson, they're flailing around in an imposed sectarian mire thanks to your government and your government's support of the creators of sectarianism, Saudi Arabia. So I'm a little bit with David on this. I'm a little bit flummoxed by this entire speech by Boris, but I wouldn't put any great store by him bucking any trends. I would just think that he's proving himself to be inept.
Specifically called out Saudi, so that's why you've got the Saudis, Iran, everybody moving in and puppeteering and playing proxy wars. I mean, it could hardly be, from the line he's meant to be covering, worse. My only explanation here is that he's seen the way the mainstream media is going, and he's got an eye as a career as a presenter on InfoWars, and this is an audition tape.
Yeah, so he's turning into a populist, David?
Well, he's always had a bit of the populist about him, don't you think?
Yes. Yes, well, look, Vanessa, thank you very much for joining us. I know you're going to run. Well, I mean, you're welcome to stay if you'd like, but if you need to go, that's fine. I just want to get the thank you in now, just in case. But we shall. Yes, go ahead, yeah.
No, can I just put out a huge thank you to the viewers for all those that have contributed and made this trip possible. I wouldn't be here without all of you. And it's a tremendous opportunity to be in Syria at Christmas, and also to be able to go to Aleppo and see this liberation, which is an extraordinary triumph for the Syrian people, actually, against a massive hybrid war that has been waged against them.
Okay, well, yes, well, thank you for your work as well, and certainly there've been plenty of thanks for you from the people in the chat box as well. So that I think that's great.
It's excellent. Thank you, Vanessa.
Okay, so training.
Well, we're running tight for time today, but this is just a picture of, whilst the government's telling us we're all going to be murdered in our beds by terrorists, and of course we're going to be attacked by Russia, and China's also going to attack us, apart from when they're rebuilding our nuclear infrastructure. But what is the government doing at home? Well, we were alerted this morning to the fact that another Royal Navy Engineering College, HMS Sultan in Portsmouth, is going to be closed. And the local MP, here she is, Caroline Dinenage, is, well, she's been getting very excited by sitting down, having a cosy chat with the Secretary of State for Defence, Michael Fallon, and the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, because she's got concerns that this engineering college is going to be closed. So there they are, having their comfortable little discussion. It's all very nice. And have a look at this. She said that basically she was worried about the cumulative impact of the disposals. It's not only HMS Sultan, there's other mod property that's going to go as well, but she said it's going to have an impact on Gosport's economic base. That's Portsmouth area, effectively. She made clear her position that to lose the excellent training establishment at Sultan would be to the detriment of Gosport, the Royal Navy and the country as a whole. So that sounds pretty important. Now, she should know what she's doing, because apparently she was the creator of the all-party parliamentary group for maths and numeracy. So presumably she's good with figures. We'll come on to that very shortly. Now, one of the other colleges that was closed some time ago was Manadon, the Royal Navy Engineering College in Manadon in Plymouth, and that was sold off for short-term Ministry of Defence savings and to build 600 houses. So let's bring in this headline. Here's the famous Royal Navy Type 45s, because they've now clocked up a £1 billion bill because their engines don't work properly. And it's now been revealed, of course, that the Ministry of Defence didn't check these, to which we say that the real cause, of course, is that you've got rid of the engineering expertise within the Royal Navy, and you're now seeing the madness of what's going on here, that in order to save money, they're closing facilities, spending billions to repair the problems effectively. So we'll bring her back in again, and on her webpage, she was boasting about this. In the wake of the autumn statement, the Chancellor announced that they'd got a quick 23 billion available for this, the Productivity Investment Fund. So you shut down the engineering facilities, you end up with £1 billion bill, but don't worry, because we've got another 23 billion to set up engineering facilities. So we'd just like to praise that young Conservative Party representative, because clearly she's exceptionally good at maths, and no doubt we're going to see more closures of Britain's defence infrastructure because there's such a serious threat from China,
Yes.
Russia, terrorism.
Yes. Well, human rights, Brian. Let's bring Baroness Aneley on screen. We like to bring Baroness Aneley on screen whenever we can. And because tomorrow is United Nations Human Rights Day. And so the Foreign and Commonwealth Office is celebrating that today. And Baroness Aneley had some things to say. She said, all around the world, people's human rights are under threat. So the role of civil society and human rights defenders has never been more important. And if you go and find her speech and read through it, she's talking about civil society. She's talking about civil society organizations, the role of NGOs. She said it also underlines the importance of NGOs and wider civil society in promoting respect for human rights and in helping states achieve long-term security and sustainable economic development. So there you go. An active civil society is a hallmark of a mature society, one that is open to challenge and able to protect the rights of its citizens. Governments should not only allow but proactively nurture a healthy civil society. They should commend human rights defenders, not condemn them, and so on. Let's see, what does this one say? A shrinking civil society harms a country's stability, economic prospects, and wider social development. That's because whenever you have a shrinking civil society, the first thing we do is aim for regime change, because civil society is all about Western democratic values, and I put heavy inverted commas around democratic. And she said, providing space for civil society to operate is therefore crucial to the spread and strengthening of democracy around the world. And of course, yes.
Sorry,
yes,
I'm chuckling in the background at the thought that the British are going to spread democracy.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, well, what's this all about? Well, NGOs, of course, NGOs have existed for 120 years or something like that. But the phrase non-governmental organization, that sort of came out of the United Nations in 1945, Article 71 of Chapter 10 of the UN Charter, and it sets up a consultative role for organizations that are neither governments nor member states. And this is the type of participatory democracy that we've been talking about, where only charities and NGOs get to participate and individuals don't. Now, NGOs, that applies to any non-profit, non-governmental organization, of course, but the term civil society organization only applies to those NGOs that are accredited by the United Nations and hold consultative consultative status by this organization, the Economic and Social Council. So this is part of the United Nations Economic and Social Council. But what they said in 1995 in this document, our Global Neighborhood, which is a United Nations document published by it's a report of the Commission on Global Governance, which is a United Nations funded organization. 1995, this was published. It said that in 1995, there were 28,900 international NGOs worldwide and hundreds of thousands of national NGOs. And it said that as of late 1994, only 980 of those were officially accredited by the UN's Economic and Social Council. However, those 980 NGOs are affiliated with tens of thousands of the other NGOs in almost everywhere on the planet. And by virtue of their affiliation with the accredited NGOs, they become accredited themselves, right? So lots and lots of accredited NGOs, they get to take part in this participatory democracy while the rest of us don't. But here's the interesting thing. NGOs in this document who are unaccredited are described as populist organizations. Remember, this was published in 1995, right?
So, interesting term.
Yes, populist organizations. And as described in this document, there was a concern that these organizations could upset, possibly even destroy the work of decades of the globalist agenda, right? So, interestingly enough, we've been talking about populism because that's been in the press. We mentioned yesterday that David Cameron was doing a speaking tour of the United States for his latest NGO. And he was giving a talk yesterday to students at the DePaul University in Indiana. And he said that populism cost him his job.
Yeah, so that's a terrible thing that people should have an opinion.
Yes, so populism of major concern to globalists and people of that ilk.
Yeah.
And has been for 20 or 30 years.
Global dictatorship, of which we're seeing the UK part. And we just bring this in very quickly. Thank you very much to the person who alerted us to this. It's a document which has come out of the Cabinet Office. We expanded a bit on screen. This is talking about matters constitutional. Mr. Cayley raises a number of interesting points relating to parliamentary sovereignty. Parliament and government are, of course, two separate branches of the state with separate functions, the judiciary being another. The powers vested in the executive through the royal prerogative or otherwise, and the powers accorded to Parliament are therefore not the same. Within this, Mr. Cayley will be aware that the United Kingdom is a representative democracy in which Parliament is supreme. Parliament can make or unmake any law, and the courts do not have a power to declare a statute unconstitutional and therefore invalid. So we've got the massive conservative lie here that Parliament is supreme, Parliament is sovereign, and this should be seen in the context of David Cameron, who, talking to the Conservative Women Group, said all he was really interested in was making sure that his party, the Tory party, had complete dominance in the political spectrum. That's a dictatorship. And if we're pointing a big stick at Parliament, we better point a big stick in this direction, because I just really couldn't believe this. This is the Daily Mail with a huge feature on this group of people who were apparently having some form of fancy dress parade. I just thought to myself, what would I think about them if I was living on the streets and probably feeling quite hungry?
Well, interestingly, we'll be talking about benefits fraud later on, so maybe...
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know whether the men were worried in this picture, but they tend to sort of strap up their trousers for some reason. But the other thing that caught my eye was this, of course, medal upon medal there with Prince Philip. So we've got Big Al Blackman imprisoned for fighting for crown and country. No medals for him, dripping in medals and a life of luxury for the others. I find it obscene these days. And as I discover more about the lifestyle of our royal family, I find it even more obscene.
David, any thoughts?
Well, I'd like to go back, if I may, to the comment on the closure of the engineering college. This is really ripping the heart out of the Royal Navy from an engineering point of view. And it's my profession. If you outsource key functions, what happens is you de-skill an organisation. You become more and more efficient at doing less and less, and eventually extremely efficient at doing nothing at all. It's a terminal move that will take the heart out of an organisation. It's fine if it's peripheral matters, if it's payroll or something. But if you're talking about putting a ship into a position and making it operate as a machine, as a fighting machine, then this is absolutely key infrastructure that's been removed, and it seems to be again part of the assault on the Royal Navy that you've covered in so much detail over the last years.
Well, David, you're absolutely right on that, and I'll just add that we do get some good reports on particularly the Royal Navy, but we have to be very careful in what we say. The minimum I can say is the reports are of utter chaos within the Royal Navy. and ships which are simply not able to function because either they don't have the skilled engineers on board, or there's problems with spares, or the equipment itself is defective. And yeah, closing down the colleges will make sure, of course, that the Royal Navy simply can't function.
Right, a couple of advertisements. We just wanted to mention that next Friday, the 16th, will be the last UK column news of 2016. We've got a lot of work piling up that we haven't been able to do during the year that we want to get done over the Christmas break. So we're taking an extended Christmas break. 16th is the last news, and we will be back on the 4th January. What's next, Brian?
Well, we'd like to say a big thank you to all the people who are subscribing to us and those who kindly donated. We do appreciate it. We do also have to say we need more support. What we would like to see is, out of the number of people who are clearly supporting the UK column, it would be wonderful if we had the vast majority of people contributing a little bit, instead of what we see is many people being very generous to us. So I'm going to say thank you to anybody who's contributing in whatever way, but we still need your financial support to do what we do, and we are very keen to expand what we're doing, because as the other side are telling us very clearly, they are now starting to suffer by ordinary people putting out truthful news. So we're being told that what we and many other people are doing is working. We'd like to do more of it.
Yes.
And we'll just move on and say that we have had some brief contact with the Dochertys. And David, could I just ask if you'd give us a little update as far as you think you can on the subject of the Dochertys?
Well, it seems that the children have been taken into care. I imagine that means a permanent care order. We don't know full details yet. The Dochertys themselves are still in a very perilous, parlous condition in Ireland. And the next thing that I'll be doing after this broadcast is going off to transfer some funds so that they can eat this weekend. And those are funds very kindly contributed by UK column viewers. And we will be hoping that we'll be able to get something more permanent arranged so that they're safe. And we can start to help them in more practical and long-term ways, because simply getting them through another weekend is not going to do anything in the longer term. There's a much bigger problem here. I hope to be launching a major article on matters to do with the Docherty case in the next few days that will reveal just how grievous some of the unlawful behaviour by Police Scotland has been, and it just illustrates, I think, what they're facing. It's a breakdown of law and order. That's what they're suffering from.
Indeed, an absolute breakdown of law and order. And I'll just say, as I've said to several people, when you think about the suffering of the Dochertys at the moment, what do you say to a couple to console them for the fact that 4 children have been taken away from them when they have done absolutely nothing wrong? What do you say to console Brian and Janice? And the answer is there is nothing you can say. What we have to do, though, is to fight this vicious government system that now thinks it can simply take our children at will.
Right, David, let's just briefly discuss Robert Greene. So we have the formal notice of the intention to take control of goods, which Robert has received from the bailiffs company. Give us the background or a bit of detail on this.
Yes, this was posted through his letterbox. The bailiffs have been round, so the threats go on. Now, this is despite the fact that the order they're working on, which was made at the High Court in London, Robert was not advised of this. He didn't know it was happening, so he couldn't represent himself. I understand legally that the position in England is that means that High Court hearing did not happen, and that the bailiffs are working on completely spurious grounds, and the bailiffs have been informed of this, but they continue on as though nothing had happened, and they've been instructed by solicitors from the Scottish Government. It's not clear why Elise Angelini is unable to find a solicitor outside of the Scottish Government willing to do this, but apparently she can't. The solicitors of the Scottish Government have been informed about the very many things which are wrong with this process, and they've not managed to respond as yet to Robert. The information you put on the screen there does provide a mobile phone number and a permanent landline phone number for the bailiffs. So that's the bailiffs information there. And there's also a mobile phone for the individual officer from that organisation who is posting things through Robert's letterbox. So what I would suggest is if the viewers and listeners of the UK column feel concerned, they should call the bailiffs and politely but firmly express their concerns over what is happening to Robert Greene and this firm's part in it.
Yes, okay. Let's move on then. Nicola Sturgeon, Nippy, has unveiled Ur Willie Christmas card.
Is it Ur Willie?
Yes. Ur Willie. Ur Willie is a Scottish institution, Brian, so be careful what you say.
I was confused over who owns the Willie in question.
Now, in this picture, only one of these two characters is a Scottish institution. The other one is Nicola Sturgeon. Now, this is really rather wonderful because she's got a card there where she's spying on the small boy. She's peeking from behind a shed, looking at the small boy, and the small boy is saying, "Help my Bob." Now, "Help my Bob" is a kind of bit of spurious Scots invented by the Beano. And it means kind of goodness gracious me, but literally it means assist my Robert. So what I'm suggesting to you here is this is Nicola Sturgeon in a cry for help to without necessarily being obvious about it, to summon up a campaign for Robert Greene. And good on you, Nicola. Help assist my Robert is indeed what we should all be doing this Christmas, and we'll be looking for you to do some of that as well. But you can rest assured that there'll be many people assisting Robert.
And people starting to take the mickey out of it already. So Danger Mouse here quoting out a version of it, which says the unnamed person gets.
Do you want me to translate? I'll translate rather than read out it literally. So there's Nicola Sturgeon's looking at the small boy, and the small boy is going, "Help my Bob." That named person is being intensely irritating.
Yes, indeed. So, right, look, David, we're more or less out of time here, so I'm just going to move on quickly to this one, which is Michelle Thompson, and she gave a heartfelt speech. It appears she's an MP in the House of Commons, saying that she was raped at age 14.
She did, and it was heartfelt, and it was moving. She described how it happened. She described it with someone she knew, and how she froze and how she didn't tell anybody, and the effects it had on her, and the very long-lasting effects, despite a long and happy marriage, the very long-lasting effects it had on her as a woman. And I just wonder, listening to this, whether this means that this was one incident, whether the years of multiple rape that was endured by Holly Gregg actually touches the hearts of the people who are applauding this MP for her stand and her honesty, and whether or not she and others in the SNP will actually start supporting Holly in her fight for justice. Because what happened here was this MP went public, and the very next day Police Scotland says, "We're investigating, we're right on it." And this is what happens when you have power and influence. The people who are needing the help of Police Scotland and others are those without power and influence, are those who are most vulnerable in our society, such as Holly Gregg, who are being abused by the powerful. And that's the one that we need to be able to tackle as well. Okay, and David, we're just going to, we're out of time, literally, so we're just going to end on this one to kind of lighten the mood a little bit.
I mean, this is staggering. The Scottish Transport Minister has been caught driving without insurance.
There are no words, Mike. I mean, it's quite beautiful in its incompetence. Yes, that's a metaphor for the entire SNP government right there.
Yes. Yes. Well, okay. Brilliant. Thank you.
Yes, David, thank you very much. Well, what a news it has been today with that tremendous update from Vanessa Beeley. It will be interesting to see what's reported in the BBC and other so-called true media over the next few days. I have to choose my words carefully there, but we will have further reports in due course. And I'll just say that I did notice in our chat box that people were discussing life under Nogbad the Bad, which was pretty bad indeed. But I think a few people don't realise that that was actually part of the kingdom in which Noggin the Nog spent his life. And if you still don't understand that, have a look for Noggin the Nog website, where there will be a kingdom where we have law and order functioning.
Really?
Yes. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you very much for joining us. We will be back at the same time on Monday. Bye-bye.